All right, today we're going to take a detailed look at prop wash. Okay, so we're going to look at what prop wash looks like in your flight logs, because obviously that's the easiest way to understand what's going on and what terms really impact prop wash. D term versus P term, how do they react, so on and so forth. Which access you're really getting the prop wash on, things like that. So to take a look at this yourself, you can go ahead and download my VUAV Tech setup file for trace setups. If you browse out to tiny.cc/filtercalc, you can hit open log file video. Once you have this file downloaded here, so you go under the BBE trace templates, you can go ahead and click this JSON file and get it downloaded, put it on your computer somewhere, click it here, and then it will open that trace setup. Once you have a log open, it really just imports it, so you can have black box open blank or have a log open. Once it's imported once, it's there to stay. So if you have other trace setups, your own custom ones, you want to save those out first using the export and then bring this in. Now, when these trace setups, I did make a little Word doc here so you can, and it's a PDF as well out there, same directory. So I have the different trace setups, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 0. You can see 4, 5, and 6 are blank right now, and that's which one we're on here. We're going to go ahead and take a look at the prop wash setup here. So for that, you press 3 on your keyboard, and that will immediately take you to these setups here, where we can, I have this set up for what I would have traces for to, again, look at prop wash. Before we get into looking at the different traces for prop wash, I wanted to cover the basis of why we're going to be looking at PID error versus the gyro itself. And the really basis is for simplification. The main point is that the gyro, if you're looking to follow the gyro and compare it to the set point, you can see here I have the set point RC rate, which is basically the set point that the gyro is trying to follow. Then you have to use the gyro trace. But if you simply want to see error in general, so how far is this off the set point, you can see when the set point or RC rate is 0, then that's not a part of it. You can see it doesn't diverge and they directly overlap each other. And when we're looking at the D term and the P term, those are always coming off of 0 as well. So it makes it a little bit easier for scaling and simplification in what we're looking at. Okay. So back to trace setup number 3. So what we have here is 3 trace setups. First one is PID error and the P and D on the roll. Same thing for pitch, and then we have the PID sums. So as we discussed before, the PID sum is literally the P term, the I term, the D term, and now the feed forward or F term added together. So in this case, obviously it would be 3.6. Then if you add a negative number, that's really subtraction, and then I don't have the I and the F term shown here, but if you'd add those together, and you can do this on your own, or just trust me, they will exactly match the PID sum down here. And that PID sum is basically what's giving the quadcopter direction. It goes into the mixers, and then the mixer tells which motor has to spin up to produce what the PID sum's directing it to do. So it's kind of simple. Looking at this trace holistically, we can determine which axis is really having the most amount of prop wash. In this section of prop wash here, you can see the gyro trace right here on the pitch and the roll, and you can see the pitch has some, but primarily it's coming from the roll axis. So that was where we're going to focus our attention. So what we can do here is click on this little box, and that will expand that to be full screen. You can click it again to get back to all 3 trace setups, or you can always press 3 on the keyboard as well. So we're going to zoom in here a little bit on this since we have that full screen, and we're going to take a really close look at this. So when we're moving along here, you can see we want to keep your eye on this PID error here, which is really just the gyro reading, and you can see the D term and the P term and how they're going to react. So again, we've talked about this in the past, that the D term is really the magnitude or the derivative of the gyro slope. So it's really just measuring, the higher the D term means the slope on the gyro right here is higher. and the D term's measuring that magnitude. The higher the D term, the higher the gyro slope, or vice versa. The higher the gyro slope, then the higher the D term. Now that derivative is multiplied by your D gain. So the higher the D gain, obviously it just multiplies this out and makes this slope or derivative push out farther based on the higher D gain. It's just that simple. Same thing for the P gain. That's proportional to the amount of error. So the P gain is proportional to the difference in the PID error from this zero line to the gyro, since we're looking at PID error here because we simplified that. So you can see that it's a direct mirror image, and you could say, well, it's higher. Why is the P term? Well, it's because of the P gains are pushing this higher to push back harder against the gyro error. The D term, again, is that slope. So what we want to see there, obviously, is that the D term is reacting immediately to any change in slope. Like I talked about before, the D term opposes all movement, and in this case, that's what we want. This gyro is getting pushed off of zero. We'd really love this gyro to be zero all the time. So when you're looking at the P error, the PID error trace, in the ideal scenario, which we'll never get, there's zero PID error all the time. The entire flight, zero PID error, no matter where you move the sticks, what prop wash you go into, what wind condition. If we had a perfect ideal PID controller, perfectly tuned everything, PID error would be zero all the time. So we're not there, and you can see as we're going into prop wash, this is oscillating back and forth with error. You can zoom out here a little bit, you can see it, it's a little more clear. So let's look at this section right here. Right here, we're going, you can see that the gyro is really pushing down, and what's the D term doing? It's reacting to that right away. So your D term should always precede the P term in reaction. And you're really looking for, at least I look for, by the time you get to mid-slope of where that error is pushing, that your D term's at full reaction. So same here, trying to look for mid-slope on that is my D term at full reaction. Now, there's a couple parts of latency here. Really what we're looking at here on this PID error, to begin with, that data is offset back in time. It has latency associated about 2 to 3 milliseconds based on the gyro itself. Like you get the raw noise coming in, it's filtered, and then this whole line here is offset back around 2 to 3 milliseconds. So to show you what I'm talking about there, I'm going to go ahead and add a new graph, and I'm going to light up and turn on here the gyro on roll, and then I'm also going to add another one here for the debug. Now I have the debug FFT recorded here for dynamic notch stuff. So you can see gyro roll. I have the roll raw noise there as well. So let's set this to be purple, and we'll set this maybe to be red. Now add another trace down here. So you can see here's my gyro. Really it's the error up top, but this is the gyro itself. And what I'm talking about here is this is the raw noise. So if I zoom in on this, you can kind of see hopefully you can see what I'm talking about. If you were to trace this by hand, you probably, without looking at this gyro trace at all, you would probably trace it down around here and up through here. Here it's pretty close to where it needs to be, but over here you probably wouldn't be so far back. So when your eye's looking at this, you're thinking, well, where I would probably trace that through to where the gyro is, or the gyro trace is, it's not that far off, but you can't look down this way. You need to look horizontally across this way. There's a couple components here. Honestly, when you're looking at it that way as well, you need to turn off Expo and probably zoom these up. So Expo exaggerates the y-axis on the graphs here, which is normally okay. You have to keep that in mind. But when you're really starting to thread the needle on things, it's best to turn off Expo and turn these zoom values way up, and then you can get a one-to-one relationship there. And say we would have the gyro, let's look at this case. Say we would say right here is where we would trace the line through. You'd have to do a marked point and then go out until you can see where that gyro actually crosses that same reading here. So that's where you can use the mark point and kind of measure your latency using the gyro traces. So getting back to this, so we just established that the gyro, the PID error, or the gyro measurement, and then the PID error as a result of that, has latency associated, and then the D term also has latency. And we can't really measure that directly because we have nothing for comparison, but you can calculate that using my spreadsheet, and it usually has around, I don't know, it depends on your D-term filtering, but you usually have from 2 to 3 milliseconds of latency, D-term latency as well. So, you know, these lines are reacting, but they're kind of behind all the time, and that's what that latency is. That's the biggest part of everything. If we could get latency to be 0, it would make a huge, huge difference in flight performance. It is the #1 delay, flight hindering performance part of all quadcopters. It's filter latency, and that's why I'm so into it, because I know how important it is to reduce latency as much as possible. But then you also have to have appropriate filtering as well. So let's talk about appropriate filtering. So you can see in here, when we're having this D term move up and down, your log may or may not look like this with your D term. And what I want to point out here is a consistent message. So you can see this D term here is fairly smooth. You know, I don't have smoothing turned on. Smoothing's turned off, and as the gyro is going down, again, this purple line here, or purplish blue, is going down, D term's rising up, and if I go back to my traces here, you can see my roll, my motor noise for roll, is, you know, reacting accordingly to that D term, since it is just the sum, so it's getting its biggest gain from the D term addition here. And then as D term starts to subside, now the P term is being its additional factor here as well. And now at this point, once we get to this point in the line, so looking at the red line, now my P term is adding to the PID sum, but my D term's actually subtracting from my PID sum. And why is it doing that? Well, it's trying to soften the gyro. It recognizes it's coming back to the set point here, and it doesn't want to overshoot. So the D term's kind of softening that blow, or dampening that, so that we don't overshoot the target. So if you look at your gyro traces and D term trace, and you see this D term just jagging all over the place, go ahead and make sure your smoothing is off, and look at your PID sum and see if you're getting a consistent message. If your D term has a ton of noise on it, well, it's very difficult for it to address prop wash, because it's just not getting a consistent message. It's like if somebody's giving you directions, you know, following a map, and you're the driver, and they're saying make a right. No wait, I'm not sure. Oh yeah, make a right. Oh, that you just passed the turn. It's too late. You know, you want a consistent message. You want a make a right. That's it. Not a yes, no, maybe so. Make a right turn. And that's what I talk about. If you hear me ever say from this point forward, does your D term have a consistent message? That's what I'm referring to. So how do you get a D term with a consistent message? Well, you have a low latency, or a low base noise quad through mechanical improvements, which honestly is the best way. Filtering is a crutch. But if you can't get there through the best mechanical equipment you can, then you have to use software filtering. Then it's having a good software filter set up, but that induces latency. So we talked about both of those things. And you can see right through here, you know, I really wish that this D term had a little bit more of a consistent message here. It's the noise that's causing this to jerk back up, and really it should just pass right through here, straight down, right across, right back up, so on and so forth. But hey, it's not the ideal world. I could apply more filtering, but then that adds more latency, so it's, you know, it's really a balance. Emphasis again on mechanical. It's like real estate, location. Mechanical. Have the lowest amount of base noise you possibly can. That's by trying different props, having motors that aren't super coggy, a nice stiff frame. You know, there's a number of factors there, and I know it's, you know, it's much easier said than done, but if you're going for the best performance. That's where you want to be. And then having the just enough filtering. It's just like porridge. You want just enough, not too much, not too little, but just enough software filtering that you're getting a nice consistent D-term message in your prop wash condition. After that point, you just keep if you can get your D-term to not have a ton of noise on it and your motors aren't hot, you just keep cranking up the D-term. You can see here how that is. It's a factor, a primary factor to push against the gyro coming into and getting off track. The P-term's also a factor as well. They do add some together. Obviously the P-term's adding through here, and then the D-term as well to equal this PID sum. So it's a balance between the two. You want to have your PID controller tuned. I really like the Stinger Swarm video on that. I'll make a link to that down below. I would then usually compare that against the plasma tree to see, after I have it tuned, if there's any tweaks that I want to make, or basically it's another set of data other than that Stinger Swarm PID tuning method, which his PID tuning method is not like he may have developed it, but honestly, if you read articles on Wiki on how you tune a PID controller and then watch his video, he's just describing what the articles on wikis talk about of how to tune a PID controller. So do make sure when you are tuning your PID controller that your feed forward is turned off, because it's going to misrepresent your P term. If it's turned on, when you go to enter and move, it's going to give you a lot more overshoot than you normally have. And you probably you really want to get that P term as high as you can, because you can see how important it is here to assist with prop wash. And then from that point, once you have your P term really as high as you can and go through that whole method and bring up your D terms then as well to address any oscillations from your higher P term, then you can just bring up your feed forward values if you want a sharper entry into a move, so on and so forth. I also want to touch on D-term based off gyro measurement or PID error. I think it sounded complicated, and Betaflight now in 3.5 and up, the D-term is based off the gyro measurement itself, which is the gyro trace here, and you can see on both sides. We were just looking at previously PID error, which was what they were talking about when they said, hey, the D-term is based off error. So it was based off the PID error, not the measurement, the gyro trace itself and the gyro measurement. But I showed just now how they're the same in all cases. The gyro is just scaled to follow the RC rate in rotation, where the PID error is really just coming off the zero axis for how much error there is between the RC rate and the gyro itself. There is one differential. When you have a sharp stick input, PID error is different than the gyro trace or gyro measurement. And the reason I want to go through this is just kind of to wrap that up for the old PID error method and talk about what the differential was. So Betaflight, like I said, 3.5 is now based off of gyro measurement. When it was based off PID error, or you could use D-term set point weight to go to PID error, you can see the differential here. So in both this on the graph on the left here, we have a flight where it was based off PID error, the D-term was. And so it was D-term set point weight of 1.0. And what that meant is that the D-term opposed whenever the PID error left or came back to zero. So as the PID error leaves zero, the D-term's opposing it. As it's coming back to zero, it's also opposing that. Same thing over here, it's leaving zero, so it's opposing that. It's trying to come back to zero, so it's opposing that as well. And it just keeps doing that, leaving to the positive, D-term's opposing that, coming back, D-term's opposing that. So that's what D-term set point weight of 1 did. You can see subsequently, since entering a roll move here, that the RC rate was abruptly moved, that since it was working that way, it actually helped the P term, so positive value, and that's what provided that D term kick. The D term was pushing with the P term to make you enter the roll, and you could use the slider to adjust how much you needed that. Now we showed why feed forward is better. See all this noise here? You don't have to deal with that noise with feed forward, and that's why it was changed. But and there's other reasons as well, but that's one of the reasons. So that's the old method. Now let's look at the new method here. Now I turned off feed forward. Feed forward would be pushing here as well. Here, just turn that on real quick here. So feed forward essentially is replacing the D term kick. So down here we have the D term doing a kick to help enter the move. Now we have feed forward doing that, and it's helping the P term. Do note that the D term is opposing it. So in D term based off measurement, the D term is not looking at pit error at all, and you can see the differential between how it acted here with pit error versus how it's acting here with pit error. It is opposing the gyro measurement motion at all times. So if the gyro is going up, D term's going down. The gyro is coming down, which you have a little bit of overshoot here, and D term's going up to oppose that. The gyro is going down, D term's going up to oppose that. So it's just a little bit, it's a slight difference. It's really just a slight difference in how the D term's operating, but that's all it was all along. It's just that little bit of differential. Is it based off this trace or is it based off this trace? And it gave a little bit of a fundamental difference, really only when the set point was abruptly moved. Otherwise, it was the same. Okay, so with both of those, prop wash review and okay, so hopefully by reviewing prop wash like this, you have a little bit better understanding with really what's happening in the background and how that D term is so important to really be Johnny on the spot to start pushing against prop wash. In addition, the P term is important as well because they both sum together in your PID sum down here, and you can see that right here to push against that and get the gyro back to zero or back to PID error of zero here. And you can check your logs to see which axis. So you can see here my roll axis is the primary problem, not my pitch axis. And also, is my D term providing a consistent message? Do I need more filtering? Is filtering really the issue because it's just the D term is just all over the place, so it's not giving a really consistent message. One thing you do note is that you can just kind of see the average. You can click this smoothing down here if you have a D term that's really all over the place to smooth it out to see what overall the message is, but with the consistency of the vibrations of the D term in mind. If you have a super inconsistent D term message, you probably need a little bit, honestly, if you can do mechanical improvements, that would be the best, or change props or something of that nature. But if other than that, you might need better filtering. And do note that if you get better filtering, you may be able to lower your D term because it will have a more consistent message. So it'll be acting and responding more clearly, like we talked about with the right turn, left turn thing. And you might not need as much D term. Drop any questions or comments you might have down below, and thanks, I hope this helped.